Samson versus World's Strongest Men, the divine gift. Can today's mightiest strongmen, armed with science, training, and grit, rival the divine strength of Samson? A man who toppled temples, shattered armies, and bore gates upon his shoulders. Today, we explore the legend and the mystery. Welcome to Myth and Tales. If you love legends, mysteries, and stories that defy time, hit like, subscribe, and share. It helps this channel grow and brings more tales to life. Samson's origin. Samson's story begins with prophecy. His birth was foretold by an angel, a child destined to deliver Israel from Philistine oppression. His very name, Shimshon in Hebrew, echoes the word Shemesh, the sun, a symbol of light and fire. Samson was a Nazarite, and for that reason he is not allowed to drink alcohol, touch corpses, or cut his hair, because that's the covenant between the Nazarites and God. But did Samson ever keep these covenants? Unlike most Nazarites, Samson broke nearly every rule. He drank at feasts. He touched carcasses, the lion he killed. He pursued Philistine women. Only his uncut hair remained, and that was his final link to the vow and his strength. The feats of Samson. Before Hafthor Bjornsson pulled half a ton from the ground, before Eddie Hall deadlifted 500 kilos, there was a man of myth, a Nazarite, a warrior, a legend whose feats shook kingdoms and defied human limits. Judges 13-16 records his story. But what if we compared Samson's strength to the strongest men of today? Could his feats be measured, or are they echoes of myth woven into scripture? Let's break it down. The Lion of Timnah. One day, as Samson walked toward the vineyards of Timnah, the air grew heavy with silence. From the shadows of the path leapt a roaring lion, muscles rippling, fangs flashing like daggers of the wilderness. Most men would flee, but Samson stood his ground. The Spirit of the Lord surged through him like fire in his veins. He seized the beast with his bare hands. Muscles swelled, sinews strained, and with a cry that split the valley, he tore the lion apart as if it were a young goat. Lions weigh up to 500 pounds and can crush bones with a single bite. Even the strongest MMA fighters wouldn't last 30 seconds against one. Yet Samson, unarmed, seized it and tore it apart. The text compares it to tearing a goat, suggesting it was effortless. Modern strongmen, they can lift 500 kilos, flip cars, and crush logs. But wrestle a lion barehanded? Impossible. Even 20 strongmen cannot defeat a lion barehanded. But Samson was not only a slayer of beasts, he was a man entangled in passion and anger. At his wedding feast, tricked and betrayed by Philistine cunning, he burned with wrath. The slaughter at Ashkelon. The sun blazed over Timnah as Samson prepared for his wedding feast. Bound by passion, he had set his eyes on a Philistine woman. And so the feast began, 7 days of wine, laughter, and riddles. Samson, during his wedding feast, challenged 30 Philistines with a riddle. When they couldn't solve it, they forced his bride to betray him. Enraged at their deceit, he stormed away from the feast, not with laughter, not with joy, but with wrath. Down he went to Ashkelon, a city proud of its Philistine power. There, 30 men met him, but they did not leave alive. With hands like hammers, Samson struck them down, one by one, warriors and nobles alike. Their blood stained the dust, their garments ripped from their lifeless bodies. The slaughter marked not only his vengeance, but also the beginning of his deadly feud with the Philistines. A trained fighter might handle 2, maybe 3 men before exhaustion crushes him. But 30? Impossible. Human stamina fails, oxygen burns out, and every extra blow slows the body down. Against 30, even the strongest warrior is swallowed alive. Yet Samson didn't just fight. He annihilated them. This wasn't muscle or technique. This was strength that shattered human limits. The slaughter at Ashkelon wasn't natural. It was divine. The Philistines struck again. And Samson answered not with sword, but with cunning, foxes of fire. The Philistines thought they had humiliated Samson. But vengeance burns hotter than fire, and Samson's mind was as dangerous as his strength. He hunted the wilderness, capturing not 1, not 10, but 300 foxes, wild, cunning creatures no man could tame. Imagine the chaos: claws slashing, teeth snapping, fur bristling with fury. Yet Samson, with iron will, bound them in pairs. Then came the twist of genius. Torches tied to their tails, and when the flames roared to life, Samson unleashed them into Philistine fields. The night exploded in fire. Grain fields, ripe for harvest, went up in smoke. Vineyards crackled. Olive groves turned to ash. It wasn't just destruction. It was humiliating, because in the ancient world, fields were wealth, harvest was power, and food was survival. Samson hadn't just struck the Philistines, he had scorched their future. 300 foxes carried his wrath, and their flames lit the night as if the very anger of God swept through the land. Imagine catching 300 foxes today and weaponizing them. Yeah, that's Samson. Imagine catching 300 foxes today and weaponizing them. Yeah, that's Samson. The Philistines were angry, their hearts filled with anger and rage, the sort out for revenge. The massacre with a jawbone. The valley of Lehi shook with the march of an army. Thousands of Philistines advanced, their blades flashing, their voices roaring like thunder. And at the center, one man, Samson, unarmed, trapped, outnumbered beyond reason. No warrior survives such odds. Yet Samson bent down, his hand grasping not a sword or spear, but the jawbone of a donkey, rough, crude, a weapon of mockery. And then it began. He struck, bone against iron. Skulls shattered, bodies collapsed. The sound of battle became the sound of slaughter. Samson didn't fight like a man, he fought like a storm. One blow, 10 men down. Another swing, another wave fell. By the end, 1,000 lay silent. One man, one jawbone, one impossible victory. But pause here. Let's analyze. Could this ever be humanly possible? Modern combat experts say even elite fighters can't sustain against more than 3 to 4 attackers at once. The body's oxygen debt, reflex speed, and fatigue collapse in minutes. 1,000 enemies? That's not just a fight, that's hours of combat. The average person can throw 30 to 40 effective strikes per minute. At that rate, killing 1,000 would take hours, far beyond human endurance. Weapons matter. A jawbone is brittle. Against bronze swords and iron shields, it should have snapped within moments. Yet in Samson's hands, it endured. Psychology. Facing 1,000 screaming soldiers would break most men in terror. But Samson's mind burned with divine fury. Fear was gone. Rage replaced it. By every metric, stamina, weapon durability, psychological strain, this feat is impossible for man. And that's the point. The story doesn't paint Samson as merely strong. It paints him as a vessel of supernatural power. The gates of Gaza. Midnight in Gaza. The Philistines thought they had Samson trapped. Soldiers hid in the shadows, blades ready, convinced the city gates would cage him like an animal. But Samson rose. He walked to the colossal gates, reinforced wood, plated with bronze, locked with iron, doors not meant for one man, but for armies. And then, with hands like iron, he seized them. Bolts screamed, stone cracked, hinges shattered. The unmovable became weight in his grasp. And then, he lifted. Not a few steps, not a short sprint. He carried them uphill, all the way to Hebron, nearly 40 miles away. Picture it, a lone figure beneath the moon, dragging the pride of Gaza on his back. This wasn't escape. This was humiliation. Samson didn't just leave. He stole their walls, their pride, their power. The gates of Gaza became a monument of mockery. But let's analyze. What would this actually mean? City gates of the ancient Near East were massive. Archaeologists estimate they weighed anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 pounds, more than 2 fully loaded SUVs stacked together. Today's world's strongest men, Hafthor Bjornsson, Eddie Hall, can deadlift over 1,100 pounds once in controlled conditions, carrying even half that weight, not for seconds, but uphill for miles? Humanly impossible. Add the logistics. Gates weren't simple doors. They were part of stone fortifications. Just prying them loose should have required teams of laborers, ropes, levers, and hours of work. Samson did it in moments. Energy cost? Scientists calculate a man burns 10 to 12 calories per minute during extreme lifting. To move 5,000 plus pounds over miles would take hundreds of thousands of calories, more than a human body can store. By every measure, weight, distance, endurance, this feat doesn't fit human reality. And that's the point. The story paints Samson as more than a man. He was myth embodied, power unchained, a living reminder that when God's Spirit rushed upon him, human limits shattered like hinges in his hands. What if Samson competed in World's Strongest Man? Today's strongest men are giants. Eddie Hall, Hafthor the Mountain Bjornsson, Tom Stoltman, lifting weights that crush the limits of human strength. But what if we brought an ancient legend into the arena? What if Samson, the biblical strongman, competed in today's World's Strongest Man? Could anyone rival him? Let's find out. 1. Deadlift and super yoke, the gates of Gaza. The super yoke tests raw power, carrying over 1,200 pounds across 20 meters. Hafthor once deadlifted 501 kilograms, the heaviest ever recorded. But Samson? Judges 16:3 says he tore the massive city gates of Gaza, wood, iron, stone supports, and carried them uphill to Hebron. Scholars estimate 5,000 to 10,000 pounds for miles. That's not just winning the event, that's rewriting the rule book. No man could even train for this. Samson would make the strongest records look like warm-ups. 2. Atlas Stones, the Lion Killer. Strongmen finish with the Atlas Stones, lifting 300 to 560-pound stones onto platforms. Samson. Judges 14:5-6 tells us he tore apart a roaring lion with his bare hands. Imagine grip and explosive strength so great you could rip through bone and muscle like cloth. In the arena, he'd toss 600-pound stones like toys. The lion wasn't just a beast, it was the ultimate test of raw power. 3. Endurance combat, Ashkelon, and the jawbone. Here's where modern men collapse. UFC fighters gas out after 2 to 3 minutes of combat. Special forces say 3 to 4 attackers is the max you can handle before exhaustion breaks you. Samson? He killed 30 Philistines in Ashkelon, and later 1,000 with the jawbone of a donkey. That's not stamina, that's a myth. No strongman event tests combat endurance. But if it did, Samson would dominate every arena on earth. 5. Ultimate show of power, the temple collapse. In his final act, Judges 16:29-30 says, Samson braced himself between 2 pillars and brought down the Philistine temple, killing thousands. Engineers suggest the force required would be in the tens of thousands of pounds of lateral pull, more than cranes can exert. No strongman event compares. It's the ultimate feat of destruction beyond physics. Not a record, but a myth made real. Conclusion. So, what would happen if Samson competed in World's Strongest Man? He wouldn't just win, he'd destroy the concept of competition itself. Where today's titans rely on science, diet, and relentless training, Samson's strength came from something else, a covenant, a vow. The Spirit of the Lord rushing upon him. His feats break every human limit, making him not just the first strongman in history, but the greatest, and perhaps the only one who could never be rivaled. Thanks for watching Myth and Tales. If you enjoyed this journey into ancient strength versus modern power, hit that like button, share with friends, and subscribe for more stories where myth and reality collide.